She was said to have told some of the other sisters in her convent that she was possessed by the devil, that Satan was trying to lead her down the path of evil.
Some mysteries are carved in stone, others buried in sand, but the most haunting ones are written in ink.
She would start to scream at something that only she could see. She had even confessed that she heard the devil's voice whispering to her.
For over 300 years, one such enigma sat silently on a single sheet of paper, filled with symbols so bizarre and blasphemous that many believed they came from Satan himself. The letter, allegedly dictated to a Sicilian nun during a violent possession, was long dismissed as either madness or myth. Scholars were baffled. Cryptographers gave up. Until now. Using modern code-breaking software, researchers have finally unlocked the message. But instead of fire and brimstone, they found something colder, an attack on the very core of belief. Was this a cry from a brilliant, fractured mind? Or something far darker? This is the true story of the Devil's Letter, the tormented nun who wrote it, and the message that has finally stepped out of the shadows. A message from the abyss. It was a hot, heavy night in Sicily in the year 1676. The kind of night where the air sticks to your skin and silence hums with something you can't name. Inside the Benedictine convent in the quiet town of Palma di Montechiaro, something terrifying was unfolding. A nun, just 31 years old, was found sprawled across the cold stone floor of her cell. Her name was Sister Maria Crocifissa della Concezione. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't dead. But she looked like she had been dragged through something unholy. Her face was smeared with ink, dark and smudged like ash from a fire. Her fingers were dyed black, and clenched tight in one of her ink-stained hands was a letter. Now, this wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a confession or a message to another nun. It was something no one had ever seen before, a mess of bizarre symbols, shapes that danced and twisted in ways that made no sense at all. It looked like madness had spilled onto the page, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembling, Sister Maria said something that chilled everyone to the bone. She said she didn't write the letter. Not really. She said the devil did. According to her, she had woken in the middle of the night, completely paralyzed. She felt a presence, dark, overwhelming, impossible to fight off. She claimed Lucifer himself was forcing her to write, using her hand like a puppet. The letter, she said, wasn't hers. It was his, a message from hell. That night wasn't the first time she'd spoken of dark forces tormenting her. The sisters at the convent already knew she was different. She often screamed during prayer. She threw herself at the altar. She claimed to see demons, to hear voices. To some, she was holy, maybe touched by God. To others, she was haunted. But that letter? That was something no one could ignore. For centuries, over 340 years, people tried to make sense of it. Scholars, priests, cryptographers, even military codebreakers took a shot. Nothing worked. The writing was a blend of archaic Greek, Latin, Arabic, runes, and symbols that didn't seem to belong to any known language. It was as if it had been designed to be unreadable. And maybe it was. Maybe the devil didn't want us to understand it. Or maybe Sister Maria didn't want us to. Generations passed, and the letter sat in a museum, unreadable and unsettling. A relic of something dark and unfinished. People whispered about it. Some believed it was a hoax. Others believed it was proof that something unspeakable had reached out from the shadows and touched a human soul. But then came the 21st century. With it came new tools, new minds, and artificial intelligence. machines designed to detect patterns no human eye could ever see. In 2017, a team of scientists from the Ludum Science Center in Italy fed the letter into a decryption program typically used for detecting terrorist communications. They trained the algorithm on ancient alphabets, including Greek, Latin, Arabic, and even invented languages. And finally, something clicked. The code cracked. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to read pieces of what was written. And what they found wasn't just creepy, it was deeply disturbing. But to understand the letter, we need to walk back into the world where all of this was happening. A world built on fear and faith. This wasn't just any place. This was 17th century Sicily, a land torn between beauty and brutality, soaked in sunlight, but also in superstition. Sicily at that time was poor, rough, and deeply religious. It was ruled by Spain, but its soul belonged to the church. You could see it everywhere, in the grand cathedrals, the endless processions of saints through the dusty streets, and in the quiet whispers passed between neighbors about curses, miracles, and possessions. Every breath, every illness, every good fortune or disaster was explained through the lens of God or the devil. There was no such thing as coincidence. A healthy harvest? God smiled on you. A child suddenly taken ill? Maybe someone nearby was in league with Satan. People didn't question this way of thinking. It was how the world worked. The church wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was the law, the science, the education system, and the court of public opinion all rolled into one. It could save your soul or destroy your life. In this world, the supernatural wasn't fantasy. It was a daily reality. Demons weren't characters in stories. They were real, lurking in the shadows, slipping into bodies, turning people against themselves. Exorcisms were not rare. They were a recognized part of life, even celebrated in public like theater, only with screams, holy water, and desperate prayers. Now imagine growing up in that world as a girl. Your choices were few. If you came from a noble family, like Sister Maria did, you weren't expected to find your own path. You were either married off in a deal that benefited the family, or you were sent to a convent. And make no mistake, a convent wasn't always a peaceful retreat. For many girls, it was a prison with a pretty name. The Benedictine convent of Palma di Montechiaro, where Sister Maria lived, was no exception. It had been built by the powerful Tomasi family, aristocrats who saw the church as a way to show off their wealth and secure their legacy. Putting a daughter into a convent wasn't about devotion. It was politics, a move on a chessboard. Inside those high, cold walls, life was ruled by silence, repetition, and endless prayer. Days started before sunrise and ended in darkness. Meals were simple, conversation was rare, and every moment was meant to strip away your earthly self to make room for God. But what happens when silence becomes too loud? What happens when the mind, locked away from the world, starts turning inward too much? Some found peace in this life, others found torment. And for Sister Maria, the isolation became something else entirely. She began to hear voices. She had visions. She would cry, scream, and collapse during Mass. The sisters said she fought invisible forces, claimed to see hell, and claimed to feel claws on her skin. She was in spiritual agony, and no one around her could offer more than prayers and exorcisms. And here's the terrifying truth. In that time, people believed that if you let the devil in, even once, he might never leave. So the question isn't just whether Sister Maria wrote the letter or whether the devil used her hand. The real question is, What did the people around her believe was happening? Because in that world, if enough people believed it, it became real. Belief had weight. It had power. And if an entire community thought you were battling demons, then your suffering wasn't just yours. It belonged to everyone. By the time Sister Maria collapsed on that cell floor, clutching a letter written in a script no one could read, the entire convent may have already believed she was locked in a war for her soul. And maybe she was. But what if the devil's voice on that page wasn't coming from outside her, but from somewhere deep within? The nun at the center of the storm. Before she became Sister Maria, she was Isabella Tomasi, a girl born into privilege, power, and deep religious tradition. She came into the world in the year 1645, right in the heart of Sicilian nobility. Her father, Giulio Tomasi, held the titles of Duke of Palma and Prince of Lampedusa. That meant she grew up surrounded by luxury, influence, and a family name that carried serious weight across the island. But her family wasn't just rich, they were also fiercely religious. They didn't just attend church, they built churches. They didn't just support convents, they founded them. The very Benedictine convent in Palma di Montechiaro, where Isabella would later spend her life, that was her family's doing. And her brother, Giuseppe Maria, he didn't just climb the ranks of the Catholic Church, he became a cardinal. Later, he was even declared a saint. Faith for the Tomasi family wasn't optional. It was a duty, a calling, a legacy. Some believe that Isabella may have been related at a distance to the famous Italian author Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. He wrote The Leopard, a novel about a nobleman haunted by change and spiritual doubt. One of his characters, a troubled and devout ancestor, might have been inspired by the real Isabella. It's as if her ghost rippled through generations, leaving behind a trace of her pain in fiction. At the young age of 15, Isabella made a life-changing choice. Or maybe it was made for her. She entered the convent her family had established and gave up her noble name. She became Sister Maria Crocifissa della Concezione. The name alone spoke volumes. Mary, crucified of the Conception. That wasn't just a title. It was a vow, a promise to carry suffering for her faith, to live a life of sacrifice. But behind the stone walls of that convent, her life took a dark turn. She wasn't just a pious girl. She was brilliant. Records show she knew multiple languages, both ancient and modern. She understood scripts that most people wouldn't even recognize. For a woman in the 17th century, that was incredibly rare. She had the mind of a scholar, but with that brilliance came something else, something troubled. Her fellow nuns started noticing things, strange things. Sister Maria would cry out during Mass, then suddenly collapse. She began warning others that the devil was tormenting her, that he was trying to make her reject God. Her outbursts grew more intense. The fear in her eyes became harder to ignore. The stories say she would scream with such agony that it chilled the other sisters to the bone. The abbess herself recorded what she saw. A young woman in constant battle. Sister Maria's cell was no sanctuary. It was a war zone. Every night, it seemed like she was fighting something no one else could see. Something dark. Something cruel. But what exactly was happening? Was she really being attacked by the devil, as she believed, and as the church assumed? Or was this the collapse of a brilliant, sensitive mind, overwhelmed by pressure, silence, and isolation? Either way, that invisible war didn't stay invisible for long, because one night, all that pain and fear spilled onto paper. It became real, tangible. It became a letter written in a language no one could read. The Devil's Dictation. The night of August 11th, 1676, was when everything finally snapped. It was the moment when all the whispers, the fears, and the sleepless nights turned into something physical, something that could be touched, seen, and feared. Sister Maria was alone in her cell that night. No one witnessed what actually happened inside those cold stone walls. But what she told the others later paints a terrifying picture. According to her, Lucifer himself had come for her. Not alone. He brought a legion of what she called furious evil spirits. She didn't just hear them. She said they surrounded her, filling the room with darkness and chaos. And then, her hand moved. By morning, when the other nuns opened the door to check on her, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. Sister Maria was on the ground, exhausted, weak, and barely conscious. Her face and hands were covered in ink, as if she had been writing for hours. Clutched tightly in her stained fingers was a single sheet of paper. At first glance, it didn't look like much, just a letter. But the closer they looked, the stranger it got. About 14 lines of pure confusion. The writing didn't match any known language. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek. It wasn't Italian. Instead, it was a strange mix of symbols, some kind of twisted alphabet made up of bits and pieces from other languages. There were shapes that looked like Greek letters. Some resembled Latin or Cyrillic. But none of it made sense. It looked like someone, or something, had invented a new language just to write this one chilling message. When Sister Maria woke up, she was terrified. She claimed the devil had possessed her, taken full control of her body, and forced her to write it. She didn't even remember how she'd done it. According to her, this was just one of several letters written that night. Only one of them had survived. The others, maybe too disturbing, were destroyed. Or maybe they vanished some other way. No one knows for sure. The abbess, Maria Seraphica, wrote that the devil had demanded Sister Maria sign the letter. It was supposed to be a pact, but Sister Maria refused. That tiny moment of resistance became everything. She didn't give in. Instead of a signature, the only clear word on the page was a cry from deep inside her. Ohime. In English, it means, "Oh me." A sigh of pain, a plea, a refusal. That single word was the only part anyone could understand. The rest? Complete nonsense. A language no one had ever seen. No one could translate it. Not the nuns, not the priests, not the scholars who came later. It was like the devil had scribbled something only he could understand, and dared the world to try. For centuries, that letter sat locked away inside the quiet convent of Palma di Montechiaro, waiting, challenging anyone brave or foolish enough to try and read it. And finally, after more than 300 years of silence, someone did. Centuries of silence. Even though the ink on the devil's letter had barely dried, the fear and awe it caused never faded. Inside the convent walls, the letter was kept safe. But no one forgot the story behind it. People believed it was written during a spiritual battle between good and evil, and that Sister Maria had bravely resisted the devil's command. That moment earned her deep respect. In fact, more than 100 years later, in 1787, Pope Pius VI declared her venerable, which means the Church recognized her as a woman of heroic virtue, one step closer to sainthood. But while her story spread far and wide, the letter itself stayed locked in silence. Not because anyone was hiding it, but because no one could understand it. Over the years, curious minds tried. Scholars, priests, monks, and language experts studied the letter like a puzzle. Some spent their entire careers on it. Still, nothing made sense. There was no known alphabet to match the symbols, no clear pattern to decode. Even as technology advanced, the mystery stayed strong. In the 1960s, the convent got creative. They offered a free vacation in Sicily to anyone who could break the code. That's how desperate they were. People tried. Some even claimed to be close, but each time, they came up short. Whatever Sister Maria had written, whether by possession, madness, or something else, it refused to give up its secrets. For over 300 years, the letter sat still, untouched, unreadable, a mystery in plain sight. But in the 21st century, something changed. Not because of a priest or a historian, but because of a machine, a powerful tool that could see patterns no human could ever notice. And when that tool was finally pointed at the devil's letter, everything shifted. The digital exorcist. So what happens when artificial intelligence takes on a letter said to be written by the devil himself? Well, after more than 300 years of failure, the breakthrough didn't come from an old monastery or dusty university archive. It came from the strange, shadowy corners of the 21st century internet. In the year 2017, a group of researchers at the Ludum Science Center in Sicily decided it was time to try something new. They were led by Daniele Abate, a scientist known for his bold ideas. But even he wasn't fully prepared for what they were about to find. The team went searching for powerful decryption software, and believe it or not, they found it on the dark web. Now, the dark web is usually known for illegal things, substance trades, stolen data, and hacking tools. But buried in that world, you can also find software so advanced and unregulated that it's almost impossible to access anywhere else. That's where they found the program they needed. And in a strange twist of fate, a tool from the internet's most hidden and chaotic corner would now be used to decode a message many believed was born from hell itself. Abate had a theory. He believed the reason no one had cracked the letter before was because they were looking at it the wrong way. Most people assumed it had to be written in one real language. But what if it wasn't? What if Sister Maria, who had a talent for languages, invented her own system entirely? Something based on bits and pieces of the languages she already knew. Think about it. She spoke Latin, Greek, maybe even some old Cyrillic. If she were in a disturbed or altered state of mind, it's possible she blended them into a new, strange code, part real, part invented. That kind of complexity would stump any human brain. But a machine? A computer can scan for patterns in seconds, no matter how mixed up the input is. So the team loaded the software with all the language alphabets Sister Maria likely had access to. They ran the program, told it to scan the strange symbols, and waited. The first few results weren't promising, but then something started to happen. The software found patterns, repeating structures, familiar fragments, words, and slowly, those random symbols started forming a message. Not just nonsense or random sounds, actual, structured phrases. For the first time since that terrifying night in 1676, the devil's letter was starting to make sense. And what did the message say? That was the part that left even the scientists rattled. The unveiled message. Picture the scene in that small Sicilian lab. After centuries of mystery, the moment had finally come. A computer screen flickered. Lines of strange symbols began to turn into readable words, and the room fell silent. The researchers didn't cheer. They just stared. What had once been impossible was now unfolding before their eyes, and what it said was far more disturbing than anyone expected. The team didn't uncover a straightforward message. It wasn't a tidy paragraph or even a full readable letter. What they found was strange, messy, and hard to follow. But that made it feel even more real, like something written during a mental storm. The letter read like someone pouring out scattered, chaotic thoughts, or maybe channeling something not human at all. The clearest parts were deeply unsettling. One part challenged the very idea of salvation, saying God only thinks he can save mortals. That might sound subtle, but in a religious context, it's a direct insult. It's not denying God's existence, it's mocking his power. According to the letter, the divine plan for humanity is a failure. In one grim line, it declares, "This system works for no one." That one sentence hits hard. It's not a scream, it's a sigh. It's hopeless, like someone who has seen too much suffering and decided nothing matters, not even heaven. Then it gets even darker. The letter calls the Holy Trinity, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, dead weights. That's a bold and shocking phrase. In faith, these three are the center of everything. To call them dead weights is to say they're not helping, they're holding us back. It's not fiery blasphemy, it's cold, intellectual contempt. And then comes one of the strangest twists, the possible mention of Styx, the river from Greek mythology that separates the living from the dead. The line reads something like, "Perhaps now Styx is certain." Why would a nun in a Catholic convent mention a pagan river from the underworld? That little detail opened a whole new layer of mystery. Was Sister Maria simply mixing myth and religion from her own studies? Was she mentally unwell? Or was this letter never meant to sound normal at all? Styx is certain suggests a final unchangeable fate. Not salvation, not rebirth, just death. The permanent kind. The researchers didn't find the fire and brimstone they expected. They found something colder, sharper, more thoughtful. And to them, that made it even scarier. Daniele Abate described it perfectly. The message was truly devilish. Not because it threatened pain, but because it stripped away hope. But even with the code cracked, one burning question remained. The great debate: possession or psychology? Decoding the devil's letter didn't bring closure. If anything, it opened an even bigger mystery. The question was no longer, what does it say, but who or what actually wrote it? Was Sister Maria Crocefissa della Concezione truly possessed, a helpless vessel for a dark intelligence far beyond human understanding? Or was she a brilliant, tormented woman who created something so powerful and disturbing that it still rattles us today? Let's start with the idea that shook her fellow nuns back in the year 1676: demonic possession. For the sisters in the convent of Palma di Montechiaro, the signs were undeniable. Sister Maria screamed in the night. She passed out for no reason. She fought invisible forces, often waking up bruised and shaken. And then there was the letter, an entire page of cryptic symbols, written in a trance, which no one could understand. To those around her, it didn't look like madness. It looked like a spiritual attack. And even today, some people agree. For them, the letter's content is the strongest evidence. It's not just confused or angry. It's calculated. It directly attacks sacred beliefs. It calls God powerless. It mocks Jesus. It compares the Holy Trinity to a useless burden. These aren't random scribbles. They're bold ideas that would have been unthinkable for a devout nun to say out loud, let alone write down. How could someone who dedicated her life to God come up with such things? Supporters of the possession theory say that's exactly the point. Sister Maria didn't come up with them. The devil did. In this view, she was chosen, perhaps because of her intelligence, or maybe because of her spiritual vulnerability. The devil, the master of lies, used her as a scribe. The letter becomes a kind of manifesto, one written not in fire and blood, but in symbols and despair. And if you look at how the church saw her later in life, things get even more complicated. Despite the strange letter, the church never condemned her. In fact, she was honored. She was eventually declared venerable, which means the church recognized her as someone who lived a life of heroic virtue. That's a rare title. How could someone possibly be both a victim of demonic attack and a candidate for sainthood? Maybe because being a victim doesn't mean being guilty. But let's flip the coin now, because there's another possibility, and it's just as compelling. Daniele Abbate, the modern-day director of the Ludum Science Center in Sicily, led the effort to decode the mysterious letter using artificial intelligence. After analyzing the text and studying Sister Maria's background, Abbate came to a different conclusion. This wasn't possession. It was a psychological phenomenon. He believes Sister Maria may have suffered from a mental illness, possibly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. These conditions can cause hallucinations, delusions, and intense emotional swings. For someone living in a deeply religious environment, these hallucinations could easily take the form of talking to the devil. But here's where things get really interesting. Abbate doesn't see Sister Maria as a delusional figure lost in madness. He sees her as brilliant, especially when it comes to languages. She was known to be a skilled linguist, possibly fluent in Latin, Greek, Arabic, and even some ancient scripts. Abbate thinks she used that knowledge to create her own hybrid language, a private alphabet crafted from pieces of existing ones. That's not just impressive, it's rare. In fact, it's something psychologists call idioglossia, a phenomenon where someone invents a unique language, often to express thoughts they can't say any other way. It's usually seen in children or people isolated from others. But in this case, it might have been Sister Maria's way of expressing her inner struggles without directly breaking her faith. In that sense, the letter could be read as a kind of subconscious confession, her darkest thoughts and fears translated into a language even she didn't fully understand. Maybe her conscious mind couldn't accept these heretical ideas, but deep down they needed to come out. So her brain created a coded language, and through that code, her pain, her doubts, and her intellect all poured out. So now we're standing at a crossroads. One road leads to a world filled with spirits, angels, and demons, forces that fight for our souls in ways we don't always see. The other road leads into the depths of the human mind, a place just as mysterious, and sometimes just as terrifying. The devil's letter sits right in the middle, balancing between faith and science, between theology and psychology. And maybe that's why it still fascinates us. Think about it. We've followed this story from a 17th century convent to a 21st century lab. We've gone from Sister Maria's candlelit desk to the glow of a computer screen, decoding her words. And yet, after all that, the truth remains out of reach. What we do know is this: the letter said things that no nun in her right mind would ever say. It described God not as a savior, but as a burden. It hinted at a reality without hope. And it blended Christian beliefs with pagan symbols in a way that made no sense, or too much sense. So, what does that mean? Was Sister Maria a brilliant but troubled woman whose mind cracked under the weight of her world, creating a dark and complex message no one was ready for? Or was she caught in a war between good and evil, writing down the devil's message with her own trembling hand? It depends on how you see the world. Some people believe in science, others believe in spirits, and some believe both. But the truth? The truth might be buried somewhere in between. What do you think? Was this the work of a demon, or the intricate creation of a human mind under unimaginable stress? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to explore more mysteries where history and science collide, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out the next video that pops up on your screen. Thanks for watching.